We've always been drawn to the idea of hidden codes, but what happens when you try to apply cold, hard math to a sacred text like the Quran? Well, today we're going to dig into a really fascinating modern method that tries to do just that.
Okay, so let's get one thing straight right from the beginning. This isn't about proving or disproving faith. Not at all. Think of it more as exploring an attempt to build a bridge between two worlds that, don't always see eye to eye. The spiritual message of a holy book and the strict logic of analysis.
For literally centuries, people have been completely fascinated by this idea that sacred texts might have this hidden mathematical layer. It's kind of like a search for a divine fingerprint, right? A secret code woven into the very fabric of the words themselves.
And the Quran, it gives you a pretty obvious place to start. It has this really well-defined structure of chapters and verses, which creates a sort of landscape where you can start looking for patterns, whether they're there by chance or by design.
But this is where it gets tricky. This fascination leads to a huge intellectual challenge. How do we know the difference between a pattern that's actually meaningful and a coincidence that we just really want to see?
And that, right there, is the million-dollar question that any serious study has to face. The whole point is to move beyond just being amazed and into the world of disciplined, rigorous analysis. You have to ask, what are the rules of the game here?
And to do this right, you've got to avoid two major traps our brains just love to fall into. First, there's apophenia. That's just our tendency to see patterns in random noise, like seeing a face in the clouds. And then there's confirmation bias. That's where we only look for the evidence that proves what we already believe is true.
And all that leads to the biggest sin in this kind of research, cherry picking. It's when you ignore almost all the data and just grab the few numbers that happen to fit your theory, forcing a connection that probably isn't even there.
So, to get around these very real problems, a new framework was put forward. It's one that really tries to bridge that gap between curiosity that's rooted in faith and the tough standards of academic discipline.
And this gets us to the most important point. The real challenge isn't about finding patterns. It's about creating a trustworthy, repeatable method for studying them. The method itself has to be the real star of the show.
So, the proposed solution is called the Unified Numerical Theological Model, or UNT for short. And its entire reason for existing is to provide a clear, consistent set of rules before you even start looking at the numbers.
You know what's really cool about this? There's a real intellectual humility here. The people who created the model actually refined their own work. They replaced these rigid axioms with more cautious principles. And that tells you they were more committed to getting it right than to just being right.
So, what are these principles? Let's break down the 5 core rules this method uses to guide any and all investigations.
The best way to think about these 5 principles is like a series of filters. Any observation you make has to pass through all of them to be taken seriously. It starts with the idea of divine design and goes all the way to making sure the numbers never, ever overshadow the actual message.
All right, so how does this thing actually work in the real world? Let's take one of the most famous numbers tied to the Quran and run it through this methodological gauntlet to see what happens. The number 19. For decades, this single number has been the subject of so much focus, so much speculation, and a whole lot of debate when people talk about the Quran's structure. Okay, so the model starts at what it calls Layer 1, an explicit, direct reference. The Quran itself mentions the number 19 when talking about the guardians of hell, so this gives us a solid textual anchor for the number. It's right there in the text.
Next, we jump to Layer 2, a fixed structural feature. This is a hard fact about the book that everyone agrees on. It has exactly 114 chapters. There's no interpretation, no debate about it. It just is.
And now we get to Layer 3, which is the relational link. By using a super basic, non-random mathematical operation, factoring, we see a direct connection. 114 is a perfect multiple of 19. This follows Principle 3, which demands operational simplicity. No complex, weird math allowed. And just like that, you see how this one observation checks several of the model's boxes. It connects different layers of the text, the explicit and the structural, and it does it using simple, transparent math. Basically, it passes the filters.
But what's the point of all this? It's definitely not about trying to turn faith into some kind of math problem. The creators argue that the whole purpose is actually something much, much deeper.
The stated goal here isn't to prove the Quran's divine origin to a skeptic. Instead, it's really designed to be an internal tool for what's known as tadabbur,
a kind of deep, thoughtful reflection to help believers appreciate the incredible coherence and complexity of the text.
So here's what you should really take away from all this. The method is built to do 3 different things. For believers, it's a tool to deepen their faith. For anyone approaching this with a rational mindset, it's a structured way to engage with the text. And for the book itself, it's seen as a possible sign of its remarkable preservation over time.
And all of this leads us to the final, and without a doubt, the most important rule of all: subjugation to meaning. The entire framework is built on one core belief. Any numerical pattern, no matter how cool it seems, has to be secondary to the Quran's ethical and spiritual message. In this system, meaning always trumps math. Period.
So at the end of the day, we're left with this really powerful question. Is a rigorous method like this a kind of lens, helping us see a divine order that was there all along? Or is it a mirror, just reflecting our own deep, very human need to find a pattern in absolutely everything?